US national debt has reached a new milestone but not in a good direction. For the first time in history, total US public debt has exceeded $38 trillion. That is, if divided equally, the government has just thrown each American a debt of $111,000 falling from the sky too, even though they have never signed any loan contracts. According to the latest data, the US is overspending more than $1.8 trillion each year, and nearly a fifth of the national budget is now just to pay interest on old loans. If this trend continues, US finances could soon hit a dangerous threshold, experts warn. Behind those cold numbers is the very real lives of millions of Americans. Retirees who rely on Social Security checks, veterans who have to choose between medicine and gas, middle-class families watching the dollar depreciate day by day. For them, national debt is no longer Washington's thing, but meals, bills, and nightly sleep. How long before this 38 trillion bomb explodes? And when it explodes, who will be the first to suffer the shock of Wall Street, the White House, or the people themselves living every day on borrowed money? In today's video, join us in unraveling every layer of this giant debt bomb, from the unprecedented speed of borrowing in history to the way the US government is obsessing over spending, and why are ordinary people the first to suffer the consequences? $38 trillion. That number is no longer dry data on the Treasury Department's balance sheet, but the cold ticking of a time bomb echoing under the world's largest economy. Previously, it took many years for the United States to borrow another $1 trillion. Now, that number only needs 82 days, a short fall, a fiscal quarter, or just a few congressional sessions. And America added $1 trillion in new debt. Every day, this country borrows more than $12 billion. Every hour, more than 500 million. Every minute, more than $8 million. It is a rate of burning money unprecedented in peacetime history, and is also a symbol of a financial system that is living on borrowed oxygen. If America is a family, then this is a family that is both rich and most in debt on the planet. Each year they earn around $5,230 in taxes, but spend over $7,000 on defense, health, pensions, education, grants, and countless political commitments. That shortfall of more than $2,000 was covered by borrowing. Every month swipes the card to pay last month's bill, and next month borrows more to compensate for the interest. It is no longer a temporary mistake, but has become a habit of a financial lifestyle that every successive generation maintains as inevitable. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, that American family was forced to borrow urgently. The government launches trillions of dollars to save businesses, send money to people, and keep the economy from collapsing. But all of that money is borrowed money. In just 2 years, 2020-2021, the national debt increased by almost $5 trillion, a jump unprecedented in history. And when the crisis passed, the relief check disappeared, but the profits were still there, silently swelling in the heart of the system. If divided, each American, from newborn to 90-year-old, is carrying on his shoulder about $111,000 in national debt. Many people will think, I didn't borrow, why did I have to pay the price for that debt? Yes, no one signed that contract directly, but everyone is paying the price for it. They pay in electricity bills, in gas prices, in rent, and in supermarket shopping carts. When the government owes too much, the Federal Reserve has only two options left: print more money or keep interest rates high to curb inflation. But both roads make people suffer. Printing more money causes the dollar to depreciate and goods to become more expensive. Keeping interest rates high makes borrowing to buy a house, buying a car, or paying for a credit card a burden. And at that time, young people can no longer afford to buy their first house, and older people with mortgage debt cannot pay it off forever. Meanwhile, the government's interest costs have exceeded $1 trillion per year, larger than the defense budget. In order to have money to pay interest, they are forced to make cuts elsewhere: health, education, subsidies, housing. And as a familiar rule, older people, low-income people, and people living on social welfare are always the first victims. Perhaps instead of spending on unnecessary things, America should spend money to hire a financial advisor. In the 1980s, when the national debt had just reached $1 trillion, the press called it a budget nightmare. Today, 1 trillion is just a rounding error in the financial statements. America seems to have forgotten the fear of spending beyond its means. The spiral of borrowing new and paying old interest keeps repeating itself over and over again. The debt ball is kicked back and forth between governments, while the real problem remains still, growing larger and larger, and no one dares to touch it. Touch. Perhaps the scariest thing is no longer how much America owes, but the fact that an entire country is used to living on debt as if this is no longer a mistake, but has become a habit. A dangerous habit is fed by silence, blind faith, and the fear that if you stop borrowing, it will all collapse. In the past, America used to consider debt as a temporary measure, a short-term painkiller for periods of crisis. But today, that medicine has become a habit, even a structural part of the economy. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, forecasts that the federal budget deficit will continue throughout the next 3 decades. This means that America has moved away from the concept of short-term deficit and entered the era of structural deficit, a chronic disease pre-programmed in the political and financial system. Every administration that comes and goes, every term promises to solve the public debt problem, but the outcome remains the same. Spending exceeds income, and the deficit is patched up with newly printed promissory notes. On a personal level, this is like a family making $50,000 a year but owing $500,000, and still continuing to swipe cards to maintain the old lifestyle. In fiscal 2025, the US government is expected to spend more than $7 trillion, but only earn $5.23 trillion, or minus $1.78 trillion. Nearly 18.5% of total taxes collected, equivalent to $1 trillion, are used to pay interest on debt higher than defense spending. An entire economy is having to borrow money not just to spend, but to pay off previous loans. The reason lies in the expenses cannot cut, or rather, no one dares to cut. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid programs cost huge amounts. Social Security alone spends $1.5 trillion each year on more than 72 million people. America's population is aging rapidly, causing welfare costs to skyrocket. Meanwhile, defense spending still escalated after 2 decades of war in the Middle East. Shocks like the 2008 financial crisis or the COVID-19 pandemic further caused public debt to explode, as the government launched trillions of dollars to keep the economy from collapsing. But more deeply, this is a difficult political disease to cure. No party dares to talk about spending cuts, because doing so means losing votes. So Washington chose an easier path: borrow more to reassure voters, then let his successor bear the consequences. New loan pays old interest becomes the method of existence. Even as the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates, the savings still don't make up for a deficit of more than $1.8 trillion per year. It's a closed circle, where every solution just prolongs the problem. This situation creates an illusion of growth. GDP is still rising, the stock market is still glowing, but there is a huge interest burden behind it. As debt grew faster than output, market confidence began to falter. Ratings firm Moody's has downgraded US confidence, and investors now demand higher returns on 10 to 30-year bonds. The consequences spread to every corner. Mortgage interest rates increased, car loans and credit cards were expensive, businesses cut investments, wages stagnated, and the cost of living swelled. In the midst of that vortex, there are still real people suffering the consequences. An Arizona veteran recounted, "I served 20 years in the military. Now security money is only enough to buy medicine and refuel. While in Washington, they borrowed another $1 trillion in just 82 days. That story makes the debt crisis no longer dry charts, but a very real tragedy of empty wallets, of heroes who once stood up and built America, now left on the sidelines. Nowadays, Americans are not only living with debt, but also depending on it as a collective dependency. Every time the economy slows down, the government borrows more, prints more, spends more, and promises that we will pay later. But when is after? When the next generation has to pay for their parents? Or when credit institutions turn their backs on US bonds? When borrowing becomes a way of life, who still has the motivation to save or tighten spending? And if debt is truly the fuel of growth, what is the limit before this engine explodes? Probably, the scariest thing is not how much America owes, but the fact that an entire nation seems to have forgotten the feeling of living without debt. There is a tax that no one votes on, no one sees, but every citizen is paying, which is invisible tax of inflation. And the real tax collector is not the IRS, but the federal government itself. In 2025, the United States plans to spend $970 billion just to pay interest on the national debt, higher than the defense budget, which is about $917 billion. In other words, America is spending more money on paying interest on the past instead of protecting the future. Nearly 1/5 of the entire budget revenue, equivalent to 18.5%, is used solely to pay interest on loans that have piled up over the decades. No government in modern history has had to spend too much just to maintain its ability. Continue to borrow. As interest costs rise, the Federal Reserve, Fed, falls into a dilemma. Keeping interest rates high, the government will suffocate because of interest. But if interest rates are lowered, inflation will flare up. And to relieve the pressure temporarily, the Fed often chooses an easier path. Print more money, injects liquidity into the market, weakens the dollar to pay off the debt burden. But that action, no matter how subtle, is just another way to tax people without going through Congress. Because when the Fed prints more money, the value of the dollar decreases. The currency in the worker's wallet, which has not changed, now buys less. A loaf of bread that used to cost $2 now makes it $3. A family dinner used to cost $40, now it's $70. No one sees any tax bill, but everyone feels it clearly. Money is losing value every day. That is, the invisible tax is the only tax that does not require notice, but everyone must pay. Even if the Fed lowers interest rates to nearly 0%, the government still has to pay hundreds of billions of dollars each year for debt interest alone, because the scale of debt is too large. There aren't many options left. Either print more money or cut spending. And as usual, programs serving people from health, education, housing subsidies are the first to be cut. When the budget is drained of interest payments, what remains for public welfare is a crumb. That inflation is not only measured by the CPI, but by the widespread fatigue in life. Retirees charge every penny of medicine, workers postpone their dream of buying a house, and the middle class has to manage to survive in the middle of a money-printing economy like breathing. An older man in Texas said, "I work all my life, pay taxes of all kinds, but now, even if I'm not taxed, I still find myself losing money every day." When printing money becomes policy, is the dollar still a measure of real value, or just a paper overlaid with trust? And when invisible tax has crept into every bill, every meal, every pension check, do people still feel protected, or are they just being drained smoothly, quietly, and legally? Because perhaps the biggest tragedy of the US economy today lies not in the debt figure of 38 trillion, but in the fact that the whole country is used to living in the illusion that prosperity can be imprinted. In every budget report, the biggest number is not in the expenses, but in who is paying for those expenses. In 2025, the federal government is expected to raise $5.23 trillion, of which $2.65 trillion comes from the personal income tax, which is the money of working people, workers, teachers, nurses, engineers, and millions of Americans living on labor wages. The second largest revenue is the FICA tax, or Social Security and Medicare tax, which mainly comes straight from people's payrolls. How much do corporations, giant names with profits of hundreds of billions of dollars per year, contribute? Only about $452 billion, less than 10% of total budget revenue. Corporate taxes in the US are currently at 21%, but actually, after deducting a series of incentives, accumulated losses and deductions, many corporations pay almost nothing. According to CBO analysis, more than half of America's largest companies pay an effective tax rate of less than 5%, with even businesses paying almost $0 thanks to accounting creations. Meanwhile, ordinary workers have no way out. Every pay period, they see their taxes deducted, even though they don't have the right to choose how to spend that money. The government collects $5.2 trillion, but spends $7 trillion, and the difference falls on taxpayers, an analyst commented sourly. And people quietly pay in other ways: inflation, hidden fees, and gradual welfare cuts. The US tax system is originally designed based on the principle that who benefits more must contribute more. But over time, that principle seems to have been reversed. Corporations take advantage of legal loopholes, transfer profits abroad, register headquarters in these tax havens. Meanwhile, people who have paid taxes for 40 years of working, and when they retire continue to pay taxes on their own pensions. At a deeper level, that imbalance is not only a moral issue, it is also the reason why public debt continues to swell. When revenue is largely based on people whose spending is increasingly outstripped, the government is forced to borrow more to fill vacancies. And every time I borrow more, interest costs increase, the budget shrinks, and the spiral of debt, interest, new loan continues. A Pennsylvania retiree said bitterly, "I paid taxes my whole life, from work until retirement. But giant corporations do not. They call it financial strategy, and I call it legal stealing." Those words encapsulated the resentment that smoldered in the hearts of America, where people felt they were paying for richer, better protected people. When businesses pay less but enjoy more, when the system rewards circumvention rather than getting it right, trust in financial justice will collapse before the economy can recover. And once people no longer believe in the fairness of the very system they are nurturing, will anyone else be willing to continue paying for this increasingly expensive American dream? No economy can grow when most of its income is just to pay for the past. But that is the situation in the United States today, when the shadow of $38 trillion in public debt is covering the entire national finances. In 2025 alone, Washington must spend nearly $1 trillion on interest, equivalent to the entire country's defense spending. That is, for every dollar people pay taxes, nearly 20 cents of which is not used to build schools, repair bridges, or provide medical care, but just so that stays in place, prevents the country from falling into default. One economist said, "America is no longer going up, but is paying just not to go down." This is the interest trap. A seemingly simple spiral, but no way out. If the government fails to pay interest on time, America could become insolvent, followed by a global credit shock and the collapse of the dollar, what had been considered the king of currencies for nearly a century. But if they want to avoid that disaster, they are forced to borrow more to pay old interest, creating an endless chain of loans. The Federal Reserve, Fed, is stuck in a pincer. Keeping interest rates high, the government suffocated because debt costs swelled. But lowering interest rates to reduce the burden, inflation resurfaced, weakening the purchasing power of residents who were already exhausted after years of price escalation. Each firefighting measure only creates another fire. As the Fed reduces interest rates, the dollar depreciates, the stock market rises virtually, and food and housing prices jump. When the Fed raised interest rates to contain it, millions of Americans fell into the situation of not being able to buy a house, not being able to repay credit card debt, and businesses cutting investment. Even if the Fed cuts interest rates, only debt can enjoy loans cheaper than, and tens of trillions of old debt are still bleeding with high interest rates. Like someone who is paying off a 30-year house in installments, you can apply for interest relief on new loans, but old loans continue to drain every penny of income. For the US government, that means spending trillions every year just to stand still. How long can a country survive when it has to borrow just to pay its own interest? And when the cost of paying interest exceeds the cost of protecting the country, is what is protected really the economy, or just the illusion that it is still under control? There was a time when Americans believed that national debt was a thing of the distant future, something only financial professionals in Washington had to worry about. But now, that future has knocked on the door. It is present in every electricity bill. Every time the supermarket changes the price, every salary check is not enough to live on. Experts warn, debt is no longer a potential risk. It has become a reality. Every year, America has to borrow trillions of dollars more just to keep the government and welfare programs running, with no specific cuts planned. Meanwhile, the rate of borrowing is growing faster than growth, making the economy like a giant ship that has to pump more fuel every hour just to not stand still. Moody's recently downgraded the US national credit outlook from stable to negative, and the 10-30-year bond yield rose to its highest level in over a decade. That is a signal of loss of confidence, as global investors begin to demand that America pay more just to continue borrowing. When interest rates, public debt, and market confidence hit their limit point, just a small shock of a major corporate default, a geopolitical event, or a confidence crisis is the entire financial structure can collapse like a domino effect. And once the dollar loses its status as a global reserve currency, the full economic and political power of America, what was once considered unshakable, could disappear in just a few years. Can America turn around before the world stops believing in its financial power? And if that day comes, when trust collapses, when the dollar is no longer a symbol of power, what will remain? A devalued currency, or just a memory of a bygone era of prosperity? If you have ever seen similar signs right in your city or life, prices escalate, benefits are cut, jobs are precarious, please share your story under the comments section. Because sometimes the truth is not in the numbers on television, but in the daily lives of people who are paying the price for debt they have never borrowed. Perhaps the scariest thing is not how much debt has reached, but the fact that we are used to it. Familiar with government spending overcharging, used to new loans to repay old debt, used to hearing the phrase budget deficit as if it were a natural part of life. But every habit has limits. And no debtor can borrow forever to survive. When the cost of paying interest has exceeded the cost of protecting the country, when the welfare funds start to run out, and when the trust in the real currency of every economy starts to waver, that's when the bomb. This could explode. No one knows exactly when, but the signs are everywhere. Prices are escalating, interest rates are tightening, welfare is shrinking, workers are exhausted, and the younger generation is carrying debt that they never signed. A country that once boasted of being the world's lender is now becoming the biggest debtor on the planet. Will America have the courage to face this truth? Or will it continue to live in the illusion that everything is okay just because the system has not yet collapsed? And if trust is the last thing that keeps the economy standing, what happens when even trust is taken out of debt? If you've ever felt the economic burden creeping into your daily life, in the store, on the bill, or in your own retirement plans, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to continue our journey to discover the truths behind the American dream that is cracking every day. The content in this video was developed for the purpose of analysing, educating, and providing information based on public and reliable data sources, such as the US Treasury Department, Congressional Budget Office, CBO, and reputable financial statistics agencies.